All right, this is the last lesson. It's about MIDI. And before we talk about MIDI, we're going to talk about one more thing about digital audio that we were just talking about before. And it's about how heavy it is, how much memory it takes for the computer to remember it when we're actually listening to the waves going on in the air and recording it onto our computer. Okay, when we record it on the computer, that's called sampling. When I say a sample, that means any time that the computer says, "What's going on?" And so DAW and his friend Grog, they're like, "Oh, it's right here. Hold that many torches." Well, so we decided that they're going to use 16 torches so that they get like 65,000 or so different possibilities of, oh, it's here, oh, here, it's here, it's here. And then instead of just asking what's going on 10 times a second, well, if it's a CD quality recording, then it's going to be listening 44,100 times every second, because that is the sampling rate for CDs equals 44.1 kilohertz, which means 44,100 hertz. 44,100 samples every second. Okay, and what's a sample? A sample is like the computer remembering what's going on. And how does it remember what's going on? Well, it uses 16 different torches to say whatever that number is, whatever line that they're remembering it at. So we have 16 little slots here, 16 little bits, 16 little torches, whatever you want to call it. Either one, any of these can be on or off, and there's 65,000 and some odd possibilities of ones and zeros for that. But when they started inventing computers, they started making the most basic language for the computers to remember what's going on in the real world. They didn't make their code with bits. They actually made their code with groups of 8 bits. Right? And each of these 8 bits, it's like a little word. Think of it as a word of ones and zeros. Okay? We got 16 bits, but 8 bits, a group of 8 bits together like that is called 1 byte. And that's when you hear about kilobytes and megabytes and gigabytes and terabytes and whatever's next, I can't remember. But every time you think 1 byte, remember that's a word of ones and zeros, a code of ones and zeros. That, well, a code of little bits that can be 1 or 0. Okay, so if we have 16 bits and every 8 bits is 1 byte, well, then 16 bits is 2 bytes. So every time Grog and his friends listen and decide where the sound is at, 44,100 times every second, well, every time they do that, they've got to remember it as a 2 byte word, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, 2 bytes. Every time they listen and make a sample, they have to use 2 bytes if they're using 16 bits, because there's 8 bits in 1 byte. Okay, so if we've got 44,100 times that we're listening every second, because that's what CDs are listening at, that means 44,000 times 44,100 samples per second. Well, how many bytes do we have each time we do a 16-bit sample? 2 bytes. So, times 2 bytes per sample, that means for every sample we have to use 88,100 bytes every second. Okay? And let's say I wanted to record a minute of music. Well, take that times 60 seconds, and what is 88,000? I can't. Sorry about that. I did the same mistake. 88,200. 44,100 samples per second times 2 bytes per sample equals 88,200 bytes per second. Mr. Easy multiplication, not. Okay, 88,200 bytes per second times 60 seconds equals, I get, you can check my math, I get 5,292,000 bytes per minute. Let me double check that again. 44,100 samples per second times 2 bytes for every 16-bit sample equals 88,200 bytes per second times 60 seconds in a minute equals 5,292,000 bytes per minute. And of course, when we start talking about that many bytes, well, we can lop off, we can move the decimal point over 3, take away those zeros, and we've got 5,292 kilobytes, 1,000 bytes per minute. But you know what? Move the decimal place 3 more spots and make that into a 5.292 million bytes per second. What do we call a million bytes? We call it a megabyte. Okay, so to sum up here, if we're going to record 1 minute of music using 16 bits, we're going to need 5.292 megabytes per minute. Okay, now that is digital audio. Now let's see what happens if we wanted to record that same music using MIDI. Okay, so here I'm going to make a little example with a very simple song I wrote. I'm very proud of it. It's called, I call it Middle C for 1 minute. Once again, my grand opus, Middle C for 1 minute. Okay, a minute goes by. Even though I'm not changing anything, the computer is still listening to what's going on 44,100 times every second. So at the end of that song, even though I'm just holding that one note down, it's recording the sound of it, and it took just over 5 megabytes to record that minute. Well, MIDI, remember, it's way lighter. There's only, how should I say it? There's 4 pieces of MIDI information. Okay, one is note on. That's like when it happens. And let's call it velocity is how hard or how loud. The other one is, let's call it the key, which is which note, and finally, when did you let it off? Okay, 4 pieces of MIDI information. So it doesn't matter if I play my middle C that long, or it doesn't matter if I hold it down for an hour. It's still the same information. Is what note did I play? How hard did I play it? When did I put it on? And when did I let it off? Doesn't matter if I held it for this long or that long. It's still what note, how hard, when on, when off. Okay? Doesn't matter if I held it for a full minute or if I just went boop, really quick. It's still just 4 pieces of information. And each one of these pieces of information, MIDI info is 3 bytes. There's like one status byte, and that's just like it says, hey, we got a note coming, because there's other things that can happen too. And then there's 2 data bytes where you actually say what is happening. Okay, so 3 bytes per MIDI message times 1, 2, 3, 4 messages for a note event. And what is that? That's 12 bytes. So the same performance of middle C for 1 minute, if I wanted to record the actual sound, needs over 5 megabytes. If I just wanted to record it as a MIDI note, bing, let go, 12 bytes. Okay, you can see when I say that MIDI is considerably lighter than audio, it's an understatement. It's a whole different world. But remember, the MIDI doesn't have any sound. So we have to have something for those messages to play to make the sound. Okay, I'm going to talk about that in just a second.